Last time, on Samsara III, we witnessed a mass extinction. To summarize it, a volcanic mountain range erupted all within a very short time frame. This threw hundreds of millions of tons of ash and volcanic gases into the atmosphere, raising global temperatures, acidifying oceans, and doing a multitude of other things. However, the past is not that important. The present is. We have reached what is called the Archethermic period, a time of warmth and, for lack of a better word, wetness that has never before been seen on the planet. That's what we're talking about today. Mass extinctions are an interesting thing. A rewriting of the ecology of a planet can have, for lack of a better term, interesting outcomes. Look at the creatures that came after the end Permian extinction on Earth, the so-called Great Dying. Some incredibly strange fauna by modern standards appeared here, like the long-necked Tanystropheus or the buck-toothed rhynchosaurs like Hyperodapodon. In essence, the periods after extinction events, sometimes called adaptive radiations, initially have little competition, allowing for life to experiment. The early archothermic adaptive radiation will be little different. Odd organisms will develop, some of which will survive. First, we'll cover the remnant clades after the mass extinction. Due to their life histories, let's say that all groups of Phaeophyta and Stomazoa have some living members and are able to bounce back. Dodecapoda, however, is much less lucky. The only surviving groups of dodecapods after the end Protogene mass extinction are the cotypods, hipsopods, arthroderms, and basal flagellanaths. Why? I don't know. Probably luck. They all tend towards smaller sizes and generalism, and that would probably be helpful. The specifics of their survival is unimportant, but what is important is how they adapt to the new ecosystems. The new context of the Archethermic period is one filled with many shallow, nutrient-rich waterways. Let's say a species of peridophyte specializes for these areas. Peridophytes, for those who don't remember, are essentially Samsara III's version of seaweed. However, living in vast open areas with plentiful light may trigger certain morphological changes. For example, they may get smaller and thinner, they may reproduce faster, their root system may broaden and strengthen, etc. All of these adaptations would be beneficial in their new environments. Smaller sizes and a wider foundation would help prevent the plant from being damaged or removed by the current. Smaller sizes would allow for more efficient, faster reproduction, which in turn would help the species grow and expand. These features may culminate in a form not dissimilar to seagrass, and one that may fill, for all intents and purposes, the same niche. A vast colony of gray blades carpeting the seafloor may be a common sight throughout the early Archethermic period, a never-before-seen ecosystem headed by these plants, which we'll call pterygophytes. These new ecosystems will call for creatures to inhabit them. Obviously. A likely contender for the new benthic niches are the hipsopods, which tend towards small, adaptable herbivores. Some may maintain their ancestral shape and life history, but some may grow larger in the absence of large carnivores. The newly evolved pterygophytes are, so far, a successful and numerous untapped resource that an herbivorous animal could likely tap into. However, specializing in eating tough, fibrous vegetation tends to involve certain morphological changes. Many herbivores on Earth have convergently evolved a larger gut for processing plant fibers, and that may happen in these hipsopods. Another adaptation common in grazers is the ability to chew, though these hipsopods, which we'll call uropods, may have to settle for a roundabout way of doing it. Recall how their ancient pavemopod ancestors could, spit. They could use muscles in the back of their mouths to force matter in and out. This is a trait so far retained in all pavemopods and their descendants, one that may be adapted in a strange way. If a species of uropod evolves specialized plates in their throat, somewhat like the pharyngeal teeth of some fish, it could be used in a form of chewing. The advanced musculature in these regions could be used to crush food between the plates, making it easier for the gut to process all of it. They have no mineralized endoskeleton, but let's say these uropods will develop a sort of notochord analogous to those in the flagellanaths. This would allow for greater rigidity, size, and muscle attachment. The uropods will likely be widespread throughout the seagrass meadows of the newly evolved pterygophytes, but will inevitably have to adapt to new threats. The ancestral arthroderms were primarily segmented benthic animals that tended to be quite small. During the Protogene, they couldn't really reach larger sizes, as the older, better adapted flagellanaths dominated the pelagic ecosystems. Though the success of the flagellanaths in the past likely led to their demise. As larger animals, they require more food to sustain themselves. In times of plenty, this is no issue, as there's more than enough nutrients in the average ecosystem to sustain large animals. However, mass extinctions almost always coincide with a massive drop in average body size in animals, probably due to the fact that there is no food. Thus, smaller organisms are more likely to survive extinction events, simply due to the fact that they can survive on less food than larger organisms. The arthroderms likely retained relatively high levels of biodiversity compared to other dodecapod clades, while the flagellanaths, and by extension their descendants, likely were almost entirely wiped out, with perhaps only a few surviving genera between the ancestral flagellanaths and the caudopods. The arthroderms might be able to use this opportunity to sneak their way into pelagic niches. Their exoskeleton may work in their favor, as the added structure allows for larger sizes, though eventually the square cube law comes into play, which means that these new arthroderms will be more heavily restricted in scale than the flagellanaths. Due to the pressures exerted by water, we may see the development of, for lack of a better word, fish, or at least a fish-like body plan. The segments might specialize, one gaining a dorsal fin and the posterior turning into a tail fin. Whereas the flagellanaths swim via vertical strokes of the body, these new arthroderms, which we'll call peltoderms, may swim via horizontal strokes of the body due to how their armor is fitted and jointed. The arthroderm lineage now has potential to rule both the open waters and the seafloor. Speaking of the seafloor, to backstep a little bit, not all of the ancestral arthroderms will adapt to a pelagic lifestyle, obviously. Some may take up residence in the many forests of peridophyte kelp, others may adapt for life as detritivores in the stomazone reefs, while one specific clade may specialize for these new pterygophyte meadows. With the open waters likely being patrolled by the newly evolved peltoderms, the uropods may shrink in size to be able to more effectively hide within the strands of seagrass, which would allow for potential predation. Let's say a group of benthic arthroderms develops adaptations for ambush predation, which may include camouflage, more fast-twitch muscle fibers, and strengthened grasping appendages. But wait, external mouthparts have only evolved in the flagellanaths, so how are the arthroderms going to get around that? Well, hard mouthparts have convergently evolved in many different clades on Earth. Vertebrate jaws, arthropod mandibles, cephalopod beaks, etc. In saying that, it is not unlikely that a second type of mouth will evolve. The arthroderms, which we'll call ammoderms due to their lifestyle, may extend pieces of their shell out near the head. Eventually, the base of these mandibles may become a joint, which would allow for grasping. These creatures are unlikely to get massive, as they're fairly specialized in catching small, weak prey, and they may face competition for bigger prey from unlikely places. The adaptive radiation of the arthroderms may prompt the evolution of more specialized forms of peltoderms, perhaps a clade adapted for life throughout the forests of peridophytes, which blanket the warm coastal waters. These peltoderms may be longer, thinner, and overall more maneuverable than their open ocean kin. A more serpentine body may push them into re-evolving anguilliform locomotion, as the reduced speed would not be too big of a drawback in closed environments. An adaptation to anguilliformity may be added surface area on the segments, which would help provide thrust. This clade will be called Peltopotonidae in reference to their ancestry and lifestyle. pelterpetinids may primarily tackle soft-bodied organisms such as the uropods and basal flagellanaths, as they lack the robust mouthparts of their ammoderm cousins. The more basal pelterpetinids may stick to the less dense paradophyte forests, however, as they're still relatively inflexible to their endoskeleton, so there may be an incentive for the askeletal cotypods to retake some of their former spots high on the food chain. A species of basal cotopod may co-evolve anguilliform locomotion with the pelterpetinids, though likely will retain on average smaller than them, so as to be able to weave throughout the strands of kelp. Their forms may call back to their distant flagellanath ancestors, though this would not technically be convergent evolution, as the pressures that cause these adaptations are not the same between both groups. Their oral tentacles may lengthen, they may lose their dorsal fin. The relative darkness of the forest may prompt adaptations in their eyes as well. All dodecapod eyes are relatively simple, likely lacking even a lens. They probably have poor color vision compared to us, with their eyes likely only being used to sense movement, or at most a day-night cycle. These cotypods, which we'll call enanthoracheids, may increase the size of their eyes so as to let in more light, which obviously would allow them to see better. Their brains, which so far have been incredibly simple, may also develop more neurons that are meant for lack of a better word, seeing. These adaptations may allow for enanthoracheids to be active during more than just daylight, which, due to Samsara's smaller star than ours, is already fairly weak. Enanthoracheids may primarily prey upon the basal flagellanaths, smaller uropods, smaller arthroderms, perhaps there are even some omnivorous species, though they may lack the size and/or power to tackle bigger prey. For example, other cotypods, great segue, Connor, the vast amounts of minerals pumped into the ocean after the eruptions likely caused massive blooms of plankton, which, while they would diminish over the years, would help bring the ecosystem back to some form of equilibrium. The phytoplankton would spawn zooplankton, and the zooplankton would prompt the evolution of filter feeders. This is where the cotypods may catch their big break. Their long grasping mouthparts may predispose them for filter feeding, which, as we should all know, allow for creatures to get big. We see it with whales, we see it with the extinct conchonaths, etc. These cotypods may go about it in a different way than the conchonaths, however, instead using fine bristles to comb the water as opposed to the fleshy teeth of their predecessors. They may grow to be the most massive animals yet seen on Samsara III, as the vast quantity of food mixed with the lack of predation would allow for it. They would only be limited by their relatively inefficient respiration, which would theoretically limit them to around 15 meters, as can be seen from the whale shark and extinct lead zichthies, though the filter-feeding cotypods, which we'll call anthonaths, will not be nearly as large, probably capping out at around 5 meters. Definitely massive, relatively, but not all that massive. Things will get bigger, I promise. The final notable adaptations of the early Archethermic may occur in the pelterpetinids. The primary reason that they've been left out of the more dense foliage is a lack of maneuverability that could be easily changed by gaining more segments in their armor, which is what happens. They may go from an average of 9 or 10 segments per individual, including head and tail fin, to an average of around 20. The longest individuals may even push 30 segments. This would allow for previously unprecedented levels of agility, and depending on the width of the body, would allow them to squeeze into gaps their ancestors could not. This will, of course, put them in competition with the enanthoracheids, which may be avoided by niche partitioning. Remember, the enanthoracheids are well built for tackling small prey, but their prey are likely still too large for this clade, which we'll call magnerpetinids, to eat. However, the magnerpetinids may get around this by being more omnivorous, possibly subsisting on plant matter, carrion, and perhaps even eggs. Speaking of eggs, they largely fall into two categories. Flagellanath eggs are quite simple, appearing not too dissimilar to fish eggs, essentially being a sphere of growth juice, where the developing young grow. I don't know how else to put that. Pavemopod eggs, however, largely consist of overlapping rings of some sort of polymer. In fact, it's theorized that the reason the arthroderms developed armor in the first place is from mutations in the genes that regulate eggshell production. That concludes the early Archethermic period on Samsara III. This video took a long-ass time to make, not for any mechanical reasons, but rather because I am lazy and writing is hard. I had all the art finished by a week after the most recent episode went live. It just took a long time to write the script. And I have an idea why. I have no incentive to make videos quickly. If you want videos to come out faster, I have a Patreon for the low price of $2 a month. I think I only get like $1.40 after processing fees. They're steal. That's highway robbery right there. Damn you, Patreon. But for the low price of $2 a month, you'll get more content from me. Probably. I can't guarantee anything, but I don't know. If you... I don't know where I'm going with this. I know no one's gonna pay me anything. This part isn't like, this little rant isn't even in the script. I have a Discord server. Complain that I'm putting this segment in the video there, or do it in the comments. It helps with the algorithm. Yes, I'm guilt-tripping you into convincing me to put forth effort instead of just putting forth more effort myself. The antidepressants have not been working. I'll say that. Y'all have a good one.